I hear this from a lot of marketing ops practitioners is like, I always want that seat at the table. The big thing you really need to do is be able to tie things into what matters. That so what is very important. And a lot of times it's all about the dollar value. So the big thing you want to make sure you're doing is you're always framing things in the context of either generating revenue or saving us money.
This is Revenue Makers, the podcast by 6 Sense, investigating successful revenue strategies that pushed companies ahead. Hey everybody, imagine a world where marketing reports into finance. Okay, so that's probably a little scary. No offense to my CFO friends out there. But I have something really interesting for you today. On today's episode, we're talking to George Samaras, who is the head of marketing operations at a company called Ataccama. And what we're actually talking about is, in his world of marketing operations, being part of a larger revenue operations function, reporting into finance. So all of marketing does not report into finance, but George and his team does. And it gives a little bit of a different perspective on marketing throughout the business, how to work with finance. So we dived into that and we talked about what actually changes when you have that function within finance, how it changes George's perception of marketing, and kind of how to think about things a little bit different. So really interesting conversation with George. So let's get to it. George, thanks so much for jumping on. I've been looking forward to this conversation because it's got a little interesting twist. So we're going to talk about marketing operations, but we're actually going to talk about marketing operations and what happens when it sits someplace you wouldn't expect. So in this case, the finance department or work with the CFO. You've been doing this for a while, right? This is not it's not your first rodeo. It's probably your first rodeo, maybe in terms of where you're reporting, but just like talk about like where you've come from on the ops side and where you've been.
Yeah, absolutely. Adam, thank you for having me. So I'd say the majority of marketing ops individuals usually sit within the marketing org. Obviously, we serve the marketing org the most, even if you don't sit directly in there. But interestingly enough, my new role I'm at Ataccama, I joined the finance organization. I'm part of the revenue operations team. The revenue operations team sits under finance, which I'm starting to see on LinkedIn a bit of a growing trend there. Like revenue ops is usually kind of in its own silo or under operations, but here we're under the finance org. Like we report directly into the CFO, interestingly enough.
So when you talk about revenue operations, because that's, we've had conversations, I've had conversations in the past where like revenue operations essentially is operations across the entire team. It's CS, it's sales, it's marketing. Is that what it looks like over there as well? Is it just sort of this overarching all the ops across all of the go-to-markets?
Yes, definitely. So for us, it's exactly that. The three pillars. We got the sales ops, marketing ops, CS ops. We've added in our org chart a bit of like an underlying structure. So like it depends how you look at it. I kind of see it as like almost like splitting sales ops into like actual sales ops and systems, whereas marketing ops typically owns the systems. Like so, for example, like if I'm a marketing ops manager or director, I'm responsible for like a Marketo or a HubSpot. I'm responsible for a 6 Sense. I'm responsible for basically all the MarTech tool. Sales ops, just because it's a little bit more demanding, they typically split the role. So you have your Salesforce admin sitting separately from your actual sales ops analyst. And so in our org, that's kind of how it is. Like for sales, like there's a separate systems owner who doesn't do much of the reporting and analytics, but does like the actual CRM administration.
And so in that world, and I guess it has this organization always sat under the finance org at Ataccama, or is it just a newer thing for that?
No, interestingly enough, it moved around a couple times. The revenue operations function was brought to life at Atacama about 2 years ago, I want to say. And Atacama is a smaller organization, younger organization. So it was brought under by Marta. She was the chief marketing officer at Atacama, but she initially joined as the chief commercial officer. She brought over a RevOps function, built it out, just the basics, start off with this broader RevOps. And then from there, the different functions were hired out. So there was a marketing ops, a sales ops, and then a CS ops, was kind of hired and brought on board. But yeah, so initially that's where it sat under. For a while, it was a little under marketing and then ultimately went under finance, where it's been now, I want to say for over a year at least now.
Okay. You've been in marketing operations for quite a while. So I guess the first question is, what's different? Like just at a high level, does it feel different and does it operate? Because again, like you don't go as far as saying that marketing is directly accountable to finance, but finance has certainly a huge role in, the budget process and everything with marketing, but this is a whole different angle.
It's the same but different. So like obviously like a lot of the day-to-day stuff is very similar. Like you're running the MarTech tools, you're helping with campaigns, you're doing marketing strategy, finding different ways, like different ways to slice and dice the data to like identify our strategy and where do we go next and what do we do more of and what do we do less of. But being in finance, there's a very strong emphasis on dollars, which I think is good. I think all marketers are feeling it now, this day and age. But like I cannot stress, like I've always worked under a marketing org my entire life. My last company, Covea, was under the marketing org. Prior to that, at Ceridian, I was under. We had like a business operations team, which was like kind of like a RevOps service, but not the same as here. But here, everything is very dollar driven. Like every time I sit down with my CFO, it's always like, okay, what is marketing doing to pull levers to either make us money or save us money. It's basically one of those two things. So everything is dollar focused. My reporting now is like, I feel like campaign reporting is almost like a world away compared to how heavy it was in a previous role, where now it's very much like we're focused on pipe. Like, okay, this cohort of MQLs, how many of them translate into opportunities? How many of those opportunities made it into actual pipeline? Where's that pipeline sitting now? And we're constantly looking at those and slicing and dicing the different things we're doing to understand what's working and what's not. It's funny because I actually connected with a former colleague of mine a couple of days ago, and we're talking about like nurture reporting, and it felt like almost like a world away from me because I'm like, I still do that, but it's like I feel like that's like my like tier one reporting now, where like my reporting is now very dollar focused, very, very dollar focused.
And do you think sitting there is your position having impact back on the marketing team? I don't think there's a marketing leader or marketing team at this point that's not thinking that they're accountable for pipeline and revenue, but are you sort of directly or indirectly changing behaviors or changing thoughts or thinking about how you're structuring campaigns?
Yes, there's a lot. Like when I first kind of came in, it was kind of getting a lay of the land and kind of like, okay, we have like we'll say our three big channels, which are kind of like our paid media, our organic channel, and our events channel. Those are kind of like, if I were to group everything into three big channels in marketing, that's what I look at. The idea there was I'm like, okay, well, let's see how many MQLs we have, how many of those are turning into pipe or those being qualified by sales or business development team, and then how many of them are actually turning into pipe. And then we started looking at like the ratios and understanding like, is like, hey, we could have 500 MQLs from an event, but if it's not translating into pipe or that pipe is never closing, we evaluate our strategy. Are we going to the right events? Are we speaking to the right people at the right events, etc.? That's really where I've been focused, was like, okay, let's maybe kill the levers on some of these. Let's pull the levers on some of these. And then a lot of the times, like, this is a little like counterintuitive to say to me, but like a lot of times it's like what your gut says is typically right. Like I knew my gut was kind of telling me a few things when I first came in. I'm like, we all know like paid's a pay to play game, but like it's a pretty reliable channel should you have the budget. And we saw interesting things like that. Interestingly enough, like one thing I found was that, and I think a lot of people are combating this now, is SEO is not the same beast it was from a couple of years ago. Now we have GEO, which is interestingly, and we're seeing it like every month. It's like we can be pumping more organic traffic. We could be ranking great, but we're just seeing our traffic drop. And a lot of people now are using that. It was previously passage retrieval. Now it's a generative response in Google, or people are just having a conversation with ChatGPT and getting their answers when evaluating tools. I think like every SaaS company is combating that right now. It's not just us. But we definitely noticed that, and we're kind of redeploying and reinvesting accordingly, because we're saying, okay, like, hey, we noticed this used to be our bread and butter. We need that bread and butter back. How do we want to redeploy? What's not working today? And let's take some budget from there and reallocate it to see what we can do.
Now, given with finance involved, we could spend 4 hours in attribution if you want to go down that path. But you talked about those big buckets. But again, there's so much overlap. Again, like SEO, you've got folks that are coming in, they're influencing a journey, but it also could be driving in a conversion or an MQL. Like, one, how do you think about that? And two, is that your CFO ever has made a strong opinion about or participates in the conversation?
That's very interesting, because that's actually like a big conversation we're having today right now, is like, how do we want to handle attribution? I think every org I've spoken to, it's a little bit different. Without sharing too much, one of the challenges that was like, hey, like our attribution right now has kind of pitted us against each other. Like, we kind of have our business development team, our sales team, and our marketing team. And we're kind of all just kind of pitted against each other because we're all fighting for that opportunity source. And so now we're trying to look at something of more multi-touch approach, and like, how are we like influencing the journey? And there's ways to do that within Salesforce itself. And then there's also ways to do it within other tools like a Hockey Stack or Dream Data or another attribution tool like that.
Do you use one of those tools now, or?
No, we do not. We don't. So we're currently built an in-house solution within Salesforce. It's something I initially developed in a previous role at Covea. We layer it on with 6sense data. So we actually have, interestingly enough, we have like our marketing attribution that we look at like the opportunity level. So there we can see like, hey, like, are we noticing that which touch points are occurring where. And then we actually have, interestingly enough, like a named and targeted coverage dashboard. And it's basically a dashboard of all our named and target accounts. And we look at like how frequently we're covering them. And we actually layer in 6sense data today to see if we're able to see if we're seeing any account movement, and then from there feeding it to the BDRs for outbounding. So any signals we're not necessarily seeing from a first party, we're seeing from like Bombora or something like that. The actual 6sense dark funnel, we're able to feed that to the BDR team, and they're able to leverage that.
Great. So you directly report yourself to, I assume, to a RevOps leader?
Yeah, recently started reporting to RevOps leader. Yeah.
So if we think about this for a second, right, like whether or not marketing operations sits in finance department, what do you think are maybe 3 or 4 and however many number of like key learnings you think this experience has given you that you think that you would say to other marketing ops leaders, hey, sitting in finance has opened my eyes to this or made me think about things differently that they could apply, again, whether or not they're reporting into a marketing leader or finance?
For me, I think it really comes down, like I hear this from a lot of marketing ops practitioners, is like, I always want that seat at the table. And you hear that quite a bit. Like, I need a seat at the table. I want to sit at the table. I feel like I'm just kind of like an order taker or an IT team. The big thing you really need to do is be able to tie things into what matters. That so what is very important. And a lot of times it's all about the dollar value. So the big thing you want to make sure you're doing is you're always framing things in the context of either generating revenue or saving us money, for marketing revenue. So that's what I would really focus on. I think a lot of marketers get like really pumped up when they see some cool stuff within Nurture. They're like, oh, hey, like I built this email stream and the open rate went here. And it's like, you bring it to an exec, there's a lot of like, so what? And like finance especially is very black and white, very cut dry. It's like, is this an, debit or credit, asset or liability? That's very much how things are looked at. It's very like spreadsheet driven. So I always recommend a lot of marketers have that approach. There's always that like, so what, which is very important. And you need to bubble that up to executives. A lot of executives, whether they're in marketing or revenue or finance or even the CEO, they're always focused on like, how are we being most efficient as possible with our spend.
During budget season and kind of understanding, where investments are going to go, you kind of talked about like levers that are pulled and so forth, but is finance, like, for example, do you have like laser focus on CAC? And I would imagine that's got to be very different, at least from budget season, of like finance is like, this is where we need to be on these kind of key metrics.
It is. So we actually, perfect timing, because we just came out of our QBR for last quarter. In the QBR, we actually have a QMR, which is a quarterly marketing review that we put into the QBR that we present to the entire executive team. And for marketing, we actually, interestingly enough, had like an ROI slide. And we literally look at like program spend, dollar spend from the previous quarter, pipe gen the following quarter created, that was marketing sourced. And we have like it's a simple ROI calculation. It's not perfect. It's like, definitely we can add more complexity, but it kind of shows us a trend line. And then from there, we're kind of like looking, okay, well, if this is our acquisition cost from marketing, we're noticing our ROI is decreasing. That's interesting enough. So like, I can't share obviously too much information here, but like, when we start noticing trends where, say, there's a decline in ROI, everyone's like, oh no, we're being more inefficient. And that's where ops' job is to go in and be like, are we being more inefficient, or is it macroeconomic, or is it something of how we measure things? Like, hey, our pipe gen number could have been great relative to spend, but if 95% of all that pipe we generated went into closed lost, we're kind of sitting there holding the bag, right? So the idea there is to kind of identify, it's like, hey, our ROI might have gone down, but if our closed won rate's actually going up, we're actually doing pretty good from a marketing perspective. So it's something we look at now. And so we're trying to just get more efficient. We've switched it now from like looking at marketing pipeline generated to marketing source closed won. Challenge there with a lot of, and I think this is everyone in B2B SaaS, it's a heavily lagging indicator. The pipe you generate from an MQL to closed won, most B2B SaaS companies is over a year. It's typically a long buying cycle. So like, if you want to make some changes, you got to wait for it, while at the same time being asked to show that those lagging indicators will come to fruition in a couple of months or a couple of quarters.
That makes sense. Do you think that this is the way to have this operations team sitting with finance?
I'd say it's org dependent. I can't give you just a yes or no answer, but I'll say this: as a marketing ops practitioner, I've never felt so close to revenue. And I think a lot of marketers, like, when I first got into marketing ops 12 years ago, like, marketing was always looked at as a bit of a cost center. And, that's when marketing automation tools kind of came in and like, oh, this is how we can close the loop on revenue. I mean, obviously it's been kind of trending that way ever since, but like I truly feel now that I'm like tied to dollars. Like we're almost like scrutinizing like every single line item because we're able to see now with fidelity what's working, what's not. And really now at this point, we're just trying to find like the leading and lagging indicators. We have to understand like if we make a change now, we might not see the changes for like a year or two, but what leading indicators can we see today or in the next couple of months that can tell us that, hey, this might follow through. If I were to talk to myself a few years ago, it's definitely the best way to look at marketing, whether or not, in your career, you end up, working under a CMO or a CFO or a COO. Having this lens is very important. I highly stress a lot of marketers really focus on dollars. And I'm seeing that trend overall, but there's still a lot of marketing ops practitioners that are still very focused on like the campaign metrics and how many MQLs. And it's really a lot more than that.
Do you feel part of the marketing team? I mean, again, like if there's a strong alignment, doesn't really necessarily matter where you sit, but there's a relationship change given that the dynamic there.
So internally, they call me Switzerland because I'm technically supposed to be neutral. I don't sit under marketing. I sit under RevOps, but I obviously have like an affinity towards marketing. Like my job is ultimately to help them out. It's honestly from like an org structure perspective, I think it's pretty good. I still feel part of marketing. Like I work with marketers more than I work with finance folks. Like I talk to the accountants maybe once a week, but like marketers, it's, every 10, 20 minutes I'm getting a ping. So definitely more within marketing, but I have the ability, like if I see some things going sideways or things I don't necessarily agree with from marketing, I have the ability to pull that like kind of Swiss flag out and be like, hey, like as a neutral party, this is not right and I can't go with this. Or as a neutral party, I recommend this. And I think that's one of the important things of centralizing RevOps is kind of keeping as that neutral Switzerland-esque party where it's like, we don't really have a bias. Our job is to just be efficient for the organization, whether it's great for marketing, whether it's great for sales, BD, doesn't matter. We're here to be efficient.
That's got to be refreshing in one way too, right? Because it's just like, there's not about opinions. It's like, here's the data. This is what it tells you. Yeah. And let's just go.
Definitely. And I think it's good too, because like, what I've observed, a lot of marketing orgs either have like really good pull at the executive level and when they're going into board level QBRs, or it's like kind of marketing is kind of looked at as kind of like, the fun team or whatever. And I think also for us, it allows us to kind of show that marketing is driving value, is revenue generating. A lot of execs, they look at sales as kind of the revenue generators because, hey, they're the closers, but marketing also does quite a bit. And it's really our job to kind of translate like what marketing's doing and showing to those people who kind of care just, primarily about the pipeline numbers that, hey, marketing is actually being efficient with your dollars and it's not just, a brand awareness function or anything like that. So it's a really unique position. I'll say this is the first time I'm like, I get pinged by the CEO here. Like it's at that level where I got some really good visibility and it's great because now he can, lean on me and be like, I need you to be objective with the facts for marketing and I understand you serve both. So you're kind of like a trusted resource. I'd say once again, to all practitioners, watching or listening to this, like, great from a career perspective there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think the visibility, right? Again, like the fact that finance is surfacing that, and again, I mean, it's probably good and bad, right? Because like there's some strong programs and there's some not so strong programs, but it's not like, oh, marketing's just bringing their fluffy data. It's like, there's certainly organizations where there's a lack of alignment and everyone's got their own dashboard and their own version of the truth. And it's like, they don't match. So like that argument is over. And then you're raising this up to another member of the C-suite. I mean, that's got to be a huge one at the end of the day for visibility, for sure.
Definitely. And we all use the same data. That's the best part is like our data set's the same. We don't see anything different. We're also a younger org from a Salesforce perspective. We only had Salesforce for about 2 years. Most other companies I've worked at, like Salesforce is like, Salesforce can have a driver's license now. So it's, quite a bit older, but here it's interesting. So we have like pretty new clean data and, we're all pulling from the same source. Like, everything we have Tableau layered on, we have 6sense plugged in and, we're just pulling in all the data from whether it be 6sense or Tableau to see that data. So yeah. And we all have a centralized source of truth for that.
I mean, we could go on about this all day because it's such a relationship, the dynamic, the CMO, CFO, all that. But I have a question I like to ask our guests. It's has nothing to do with what we just talked about, but
oh boy,
it's what is the most ridiculous thing you've been asked to do in your career? And it could be ridiculous, bad or good. And we've gotten some pretty interesting answers from statute of limitations have definitely run out on that to something more positive, but curious if anything stands out for you.
One that pops up recently from earlier this year and not necessarily a bad one, but kind of just like an, oh my gosh, unrealistic one was, hey, we want to get an agentic AI tool implemented for our marketing business development team. We need it scoped out, procured and implemented in 2 weeks. I remember that it kind of came in like, I remember it's like second week of January, just coming back from the holidays. Shortly thereafter that came in and like, yeah, we need it done. I remember it was like, yeah, second week of January, we need it done by the end of the month. And I'm like, our security review is not even going to go that quick, let alone like us actually shopping around for a tool, learning it, implementing it, and things like that. So I think every ops practitioner can relate to this. I see it all over LinkedIn. We always get the crazy turnarounds, that no one else on earth can handle, but here we are. So I'd say that's the most recent one that's coming. I've got some like silly ones and funny ones and things like that, but that's one I think more thematic with the AI trend these days.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's the most timely one I've heard. So that's a really good one. So, well, George, I appreciate it. This is a great conversation and great perspective. I think that a lot of our listeners will take and take some actionable items out of it. So I really appreciate you jumping on.
Awesome. Thank you for having me, Adam. I appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Revenue Makers. If you're looking for more info on how to stay on top of the latest marketing trends, check out our resources in the show notes and subscribe to the Secret Sauce monthly newsletter. You can do it at the bottom of every page at sixthsense.com. It's packed with practical tips and insights that can help you level up your marketing strategy. See you next week.